Hello, and once again I welcome you back to Spooktober Storytime 2023. Once again, I am Ultra of Taro Productions, and tonight's story is Coming Home, as read by Heather's Film Travels. And so without any further ado, let's begin.
Coming home. Susie listened to the gravel crackling under the tires of her family's old minivan as her mum manoeuvred it past Oliver, the big oak tree in front of their house. Susie was the one who named Oliver. Her sister, Samantha, thought naming a tree was stupid. Her parents said it wasn't usually done, but that didn't mean she couldn't do it. So she did. Oliver was really, really big. Susie's dad said Oliver was older than their house, and that was really old. Susie's mum's great-great-great-grandma had been born in this house over 150 years ago, and Oliver had already been there. As soon as we get the groceries put away, Susie's mum said, I'll start dinner. She spoke slowly, with weird spaces between some of her words. Susie thought it sounded a bit like somebody was trying to stop her mum from talking, and her mum was working really hard to talk anyway. Susie thought of voices as colours. Her mum's used to be bright orange. Now it was a dull brown. It had been this new colour for a very long time. Susie missed the old colour. Does spaghetti sound good? Susie's mum asked in the same disturbing voice. Susie didn't really respond to the question because she didn't care about dinner, and she knew Samantha would. Samantha cared about everything. She liked to be the boss. I think we should have those circular noodles instead, Samantha said. Susie smirked. See? Samantha's voice had changed colours too. It had never been bright. Her voice used to be a kind of pale blue, but now it was grey. Susie turned and pressed her nose against the minivan's side window so she could see Oliver more clearly. She frowned. Oliver looked sad, even more than he usually did this time of year. Scattered in the ragged wreath around the base of his thick, knobby trunk, pale yellow and dull red leaves filtered over exposed roots in the afternoon breeze. More than half of Oliver's branches were bare, including the thick branch that suspended Susie's tire swing. The rest of the branches held leaves the same colour as those lying on the ground. Oliver always lost his leaves in the fall. 3 years before, when Susie was 4 and Samantha was 3, Susie got very upset about the leaves falling from the oak tree. She told her mum the tree was crying, and if the tree was crying, it was feeling bad, and if it was feeling, it needed a name. And that's when she named him Oliver. Samantha, though a year younger, said naming a tree was frivolous. Frivolous was a word she learned from Jeannie, their godmother. Samantha liked learning words. She liked learning, period. She didn't like frivolous things the way Susie did. Susie's mum explained that Oliver wasn't crying when he lost his leaves. He was preparing himself for the winter, and he had to let go of the leaves so he could prepare his trunk for the cold months. Then after the cold months, he'd grow new leaves. He has to let go before he can regrow, she said. We all have to do that sometimes. Susie sort of understood this, but she still thought Oliver was sad. The only thing that made her feel okay about the falling leaves was their beautiful colours. Normally Oliver's falling leaves were golden yellow and bright red. As Susie's mum pulled the minivan around the side of the house, Susie turned to look back at Oliver. His leaves were different this year, duller, drier. Susie wondered if it had something to do with the elves that lived in his trunk. She grinned. She knew Oliver didn't have elves in his trunk. She was just being silly, but she once told Samantha he did, just to bug her. As soon as the minivan stopped at the stairs to the left of the wraparound porch, Samantha unbuckled her seatbelt, and she threw open her door. Samantha was always in a hurry. Susie's mum didn't move, even after she turned off the engine. She did this a lot. Susie had noticed. Her mum would kind of get stuck, like she was a wind-up toy that didn't get wound up enough. She'd just stop in the middle of doing something and stare off into the distance. It scared Susie because it was like her mum wasn't still there. It looked like she was, but it felt like she had left her body behind, as a sort of bookmark to hold her place while her thoughts took the rest of her someplace else. The car engine ticked a few times before going silent. Susie smelled the onions in one of the shopping bags in the back of the minivan. She smelled something else too. No, not smelled. It wasn't her nose that told her something was in the air. It was, what? Her other senses? What senses? Jeannie once told Susie that she was special, that Susie had the ability that most others didn't have, that she was plugged in. Jeannie had said. Susie had no idea what that meant, but she liked the sound of it. Jeannie said it was for this reason why Susie felt things that other people didn't feel. Right now, Susie felt like something was wrong. That something was like a smell of something rotting, going stale. Susie wasn't sure. Susie wanted to say something to get her mum moving again. But then she noticed Samantha standing next to the minivan, looking through Susie's window. Samantha had that look on her face, the look she often wore lately. Susie didn't understand the look. It was part angry, part sad, and part scared. Susie's mum finally moved, sighing. She shook her head and pulled out her keys from the ignition. She picked up her purse and opened the door. We need to get these groceries inside. It could rain. Susie glanced through the windshield towards the low-hanging grey clouds beyond the steep green roof of the old house. The clouds were heavy and dark. The big house had a lot of space, so Susie and Samantha each had their own room. Susie, though, liked hanging out in Samantha's room. She thought Samantha would rather she didn't, but even though Samantha liked to boss people around, she wasn't mean. She and Susie both liked people to be happy. So because Susie liked playing in Samantha's room, Samantha let her. Samantha wasn't good at sharing other things though, like toys. She insisted that she and Susie play with their own toys. Susie had always wished that she and Samantha could do things together, not just be side by side. When Susie got her cool baking set for Christmas a couple of years back, the one that has all the fun plastic foods and pots and pans and the hot pink apron, she wanted to play restaurant with Samantha. But Samantha wouldn't do it. She insisted on playing with her own toys instead, her construction kit. Even if they were both playing with dolls, Samantha wanted to keep her dolls apart, like right now. Susie sat on the thick blue rug that lay on the floor next to Samantha's big bed. The rug matched the crisp curtains on the window that looked out at Oliver. Susie glanced at him. He looked like he dropped a few more leaves. His remaining ones hung limply in the muted grey evening light. In front of her, Susie's dolls were arranged on blocks, set up in a symmetrical order. It was a choir, and she was going to direct them. But first she had to be sure they were all in their right spots. She moved the dolls around, deciding who would sing what part of the song, humming while she did it. She didn't normally hum. Her mother did. But she hadn't heard her mother hum in a long time. On the opposite side of the rug, Samantha had her own dolls perched in front of boxes. The boxes were working stations, Samantha said. Susie wasn't sure if the dolls were in school or at a job. Either way, it was pretty clear Samantha's dolls weren't going to be as much fun as Susie's. Did Samantha see that too? Maybe it's why she kept looking over at Susie's dolls in the blocks. Susie crossed her legs and looked around Samantha's room. It was so organised. with light blue canvas bins stacked up neatly on white shelves, a big white desk with a super bright metal desk lamp. The big bed, it was this simple metal frame, and its perfectly made blue and white checked bedspread. The two tidy white nightstands with their small blue lamps, and the window seat covered in a simple thin blue cushion. Susie's room, which she could just see through the connecting door, was filled with colour and chaos. She had a window seat too, thick and tufted and covered in purple velour. It was piled with flowery pillows. Her purple shelves had no bins. Susie hated bins. She liked to see her toys, and books, and plush animals, because they made her feel happy. They all hung out in the open on the shelves, like they were having a big party. Samantha looked over at Susie's dolls again. She pressed her lips together so tightly it made the skin around her mouth pucker. The expression made her look like an angry Pekingese dog. One of those dogs used to live next door, and the first time Susie saw it, she laughed because it reminded her of Samantha. Susie wondered if she ever looked like a dog. She didn't think so. Even though she and Samantha had similar hair and basically the same eyes, they didn't look the same on the two girls. Susie's light brown hair flowed around her face. Samantha's was caught in a tight ponytail. Susie looked wild and mischievous, and Samantha looked like a good girl. Susie's brown eyes were usually wide open, and Samantha's were often squinting. So Susie looked eager, and Samantha looked cautious. Susie had a smaller nose and mouth, and was usually called cute. Samantha had their dad's larger nose and mouth, and Susie once heard her grandma say about Samantha, "She'll grow into her looks and turn into a handsome woman." Samantha glanced at Susie's dolls before rearranging her own dolls to stand at their stations. Poor things. When Samantha was done with her dolls, they'd have to go back to their bins. "Do your dolls want to be in my choir?" Susie asked. Samantha didn't answer. Susie sniffed. She wrinkled her nose. The air smelled like spaghetti sauce and garlic bread. It also had that other smell, the one she didn't understand. Well, fine. She didn't need Samantha's dolls. She didn't need Samantha's dolls to have a good choir. Making one final adjustment, Susie picked up her ruler and tapped it on the block she had set up in front of the dolls, and then she began waving the ruler back and forth, the way she'd seen directors do it. Before Susie got through 3 waves, Samantha suddenly stood up and kicked Susie's dolls off their blocks. Then she kicked the blocks too. All the dolls in the blocks tumbled over on the fluffy rug and clattered onto the dark wood floor beyond. Susie winced. Now she'd have to set up a hospital with the blocks to heal her dolls. Samantha glared at Susie before running out the room. Susie thought about yelling after her, but fighting with Samantha never accomplished anything. She'd learned it was better to be quiet and let things blow over. Even so, Susie's mum appeared in the doorway, tall and skinny with dark brown hair. Susie's mum used to look like she could be a model. Susie remembered when her mum's hair was really shiny and bouncy, when her mum's big eyes were always made up with long fake lashes and her wide mouth was always painted with sassy red lipstick. Now her mum wore no makeup, and she looked tired, dressed in faded jeans and a wrinkle-blue t-shirt. Susie's mum gazed at the toys on the rug. Susie got up and walked over to her. "Mum?" Her mum kept staring at the toys. "Are you okay?" Tears filled her mum's eyes, and Susie felt like someone was squeezing her heart. "I feel like something is wrong," she told her mum. "Something bad has happened, but I don't know what it is." Susie really wanted her mum to tell her everything was okay, but her mum just covered her mouth, and she let the tears spill from her eyes. Susie knew her mum wouldn't answer now. She never liked talking when she cried. Blankets that people never used on their beds. Her mum's blankets were hung on the walls, which Susie thought was weird. but her mum liked making them, and according to her mum, the pretty blankets paid the bills, which was a good thing, because Dad wasn't here anymore. Susie didn't understand why he left, but he was gone. Was that the bad thing? Susie wrapped her arms around her knees. No, she didn't think so. So she thought it was something else. She wondered if she should try and hug her mum. Probably not. Her mum didn't like to be hugged when she cried. Susie just stood there, hoping her mum would stop so they could talk. But her mum didn't stop crying. She just pushed away from the door jamb and walked down the silent hallway. Samantha was outside, wandering around the front yard and blowing bubbles. Anyone watching her would think she was having fun, but Susie knew Samantha. She knew that she didn't blow bubbles for fun. She did it to study the air currents. Susie knew better than to ask if she could blow bubbles. Samantha would say no, it would mess up her research. But Susie wanted to be near her sister. So she wandered to Oliver, patting him on his rough, moist trunk, and ducked inside the faded black tire swing, pushing off from the ground. She got the swing going. She then threw her head back to look up at the gloomy sky as the swing spun in a lazy circle. The evening air was cold, but not too cold. It had that fall scent that Susie had heard others describe as crisp. She didn't know what crisp smelled like. She thought fall air was a two-sided smell, tart and musky, at the same time. And of course, the fall air around her house still had that other smell that she didn't like. Susie closed her eyes and refreshed her spin. She could hear Samantha trotting around the yard. Oliver's dry leaves crackled under her feet. Then Susie heard voices. She opened her eyes and turned so she could look and see the sidewalk. Long ago their house was a farmhouse that sat in the middle of lots of land, but as the years went by, all those great-grandmas grew from little girls to old women. The family had to sell part of the land, so said Susie's mum. Eventually Susie's grandma had sold the last of the land, and someone called a developer. And the developer built a big subdivision that surrounded the house. The new houses were built to look like little old farmhouses. Susie's mum said that they were all Victorian, but the new houses didn't have the personality of the old house. The new ones were all in serious colours like grey and tan and cream. Susie's house had lots of fun colours. Mainly it was yellow, but the trim around a lot of the trim was purple, blue, and gingerbread, which made no sense to Susie because trim wasn't made of cookies. Though she wished it was. Susie had always thought her house looked like it was dressed up to go out, and the other houses wore everyday work clothes all the time. The sidewalk in front of the new house was wide, and it was closer to the other houses than their house, than Susie's mum wanted it to be. Susie didn't mind that. She liked watching people go by, especially from the tire swing. The big laurel hedge along the front of their yard blocked a view of Oliver's lowest trunk and the tire swing. Susie liked to stay there and play spy, watching people through the hedge without them knowing she was there. The group going by now had 5 kids in it. She was pretty sure they were in Samantha's class. 3 of the kids, all girls, were walking bikes. The 4th kid, a tall boy, was messing around on a skateboard, and the final one, a smaller boy, was on a scooter. It didn't look like he knew exactly how to use it. "Hurry up, Drew," one of the girls snapped to the small boy. He was blonde, his hair stuck up all over his head. "Yeah," another girl said. Both girls had dark hair. They wore jeans and blue hoodies. "This place is spooky." Susie slowed the tire swing and listened to the kids. Spooky? Did they sense it too? That thing that Susie didn't understand? "Hey, Professor," the 3rd girl called out. This girl had reddish hair and a black leather jacket that hung. "Hey, Professor," the 3rd girl called out. She had reddish hair, and her black leather jacket hung open to show a light pink shirt underneath. Susie knew Professor was Samantha, even if the word hadn't been said in a sarcastic tone. Even if the word hadn't been said in a sarcastic tone, Susie knew it was supposed to be an insult. Ever since Samantha started the grade school, her classmates made fun of her for being too serious. Susie hated that kids did that, and the first time it happened, she tried to stick up for Samantha. "What's wrong with being smart?" she yelled at the kids taunting her sister. "You're just jealous that she knows more than you." Susie had thought that Samantha would appreciate this support, but Samantha got upset. "I don't need you to take care of me," she told Susie. "I have my own 2 feet to stand on." Susie knew that Samantha had gotten this expression from their grandma. She didn't argue, and she never again tried to stop kids from teasing her. She didn't speak up now when one of the girls called out, "Freak!" "Come on, Drew," the boy on the skateboard said to the boy on the scooter. "I hate passing this house," the leather jacket girl said. "Yeah," one of the girls agreed, shivering. The third girl said, "I used to play with them when I was in kindergarten." "She was always so serious," she pointed to Samantha. "But at least she would talk to you. Now it's like she shrugged. "I don't know." The kids had passed the house, but Susie turned and watched them and kept listening. "You really can't blame her," the small boy said. "Come on, Drew," the leather jacket girl said. "Let's just get by, huh?" When night came, it dropped on the house like someone up in heaven abruptly threw a black blanket over everything. The girls got ready for bed as usual, and as usual, Samantha didn't protest when Susie got into her bed. She knew Susie hated to sleep alone. Even so, Samantha always slept with her back to Susie, and she slept far away from Susie as possible, especially now. Susie faced the window, even though the window had a shade. It was never pulled. Susie's mum said that the house should have as much light as possible, sunlight or moon. Susie liked to lie awake and look at the way the moonlight brought things to life in the room. The eerie glow cast shadows over Samantha's bins, making them look like big mouths trying to gobble the moon. She also liked to look at the stars and name them. Tonight the stars were hiding, and only the faintest gleam from the moon's sliver managed to push through the clouds. The only light coming into the room reached dimly from the porch lights over the front and back doors. The room was cold, and the cold bothered Samantha more than it did Susie, so the girls lay under 2 thick blankets. Susie shoved the blankets away from her mouth. "You awake?" Susie asked her sister. She kept her voice a whisper. Samantha didn't answer. That wasn't unusual. She didn't like talking at night. But that didn't stop Susie. "I keep having this bad feeling like something's wrong," she whispered. She didn't wait for a response. "The world smells funny," she told her sister. She twisted her mouth, trying to describe the smell. "It reminds me a little of when we leave leftovers in the container for too long, and then Mum tells us to clean them out and we have to hold our noses like this." She held her nose and talked in a funny voice that resulted in her giggling. Samantha remained silent. She never thought Susie's funny voices were funny at all. And maybe she was actually asleep. Susie held still so Samantha's smooth blue sheets wouldn't make any sushing sounds that they made when they shifted in the bed. She focused on Samantha's breathing. It was deep and even. Susie pulled her legs tighter and nestled further into the pillow. "And Oliver's leaves aren't the right colour. They're not bright enough." Samantha breathed in and out. "Mum's acting strange, you know." Samantha didn't respond. Susie sighed. She closed her eyes and tried to go to sleep. Thump! Susie's eyes shot open. Had she fallen asleep? Did she dream that muffled sound she heard? She lay perfectly still, listening. Thump! 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 No, she didn't dream it. Someone or something was walking around the porch. The sound was that of a big foot hitting the wooden boards. Susie sat up, clutching the smooth sheets of Samantha's soft white blankets. She cocked her head to listen closely. That's when she heard the taps between the thumps. Thump, tap, thump, tap, thump. Susie didn't move, but suddenly Samantha sat up, and she immediately swung her legs over the side of the bed, but she didn't stand. She just sat there, her back rigid. You heard it too, Susie whispered. Samantha didn't reply, so Susie decided that she had to do something on her own. She made herself go out of the covers, and then dropped her legs out of the bed. She ignored the cold air that hit her ankles. She padded out the room, down to the kitchen. Susie paused by the island and looked at the pale yellow glimmer creeping through the kitchen window. It radiated from the porch light above the back door. The digital clock on the stove glowed in the dark. 11:50. The refrigerator hummed, and the faucet dripped. And it had dripped for quite some time. Susie knew one drip every 10 seconds. The continued thump and tap sequence outside the porch could be heard. When the sounds faded enough to make her think that whatever was making that sound was on the opposite side of the house, she went to the back door and took a deep breath and opened it. Just then Samantha reached over Susie's shoulder and slammed the door. Susie whirled round to her sister. Samantha's eyes were huge, her lips compressed, and for the first time since she had said goodnight to their mum, Samantha spoke. There's nothing out there. Back to bed. She turned and marched out the kitchen, making it abundantly clear that Susie was supposed to follow her. Jeannie's voice was warm and strong. Even though it came from the phone line, it sounded like she was in the room. You're more than Susie's mum, Patricia, she'd said to Patricia as she held the phone to her ear with one hand. She brushed the limp hair from the other with the other. She sat on the edge of the king-size bed. That bed was far too big for her to be alone, but it had been far too small for her and her husband. That's why you had to leave, so they could stop intruding on each other's space. That's why they needed the space, all that space. It was never clear to her. And you're more than Samantha's mum, Jeannie continued. You're you. You'll find yourself again eventually. Patricia sighed. Samantha won't talk to me, except order me around. Jeannie laughed. She's her own woman. Patricia wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry at that. The idea of her 8-year-old daughter acting like a woman was amusing. But the idea of her daughter being that she had been forced to turn to a pint-sized woman was not amusing at all. It'll get better, Jeannie said. It always does. Patricia nodded, even though Jeannie couldn't see her, and Jeannie knew she nodded. Patricia and Jeannie had been friends since they were Samantha's age. Together they had gone through school, college, grad school, both in art, when Patricia married Hayden. Jeannie was her maid of honour, and when Patricia had her girls, Jeannie became their godmother. Jeannie was like a sister Patricia never had. I don't know if I'm doing this right, Patricia said. There's no right, Jeannie said. This made everything harder somehow. I wish. She stopped and froze. What did she just hear? Did that come from outside? You there? Jeannie said. Patricia stayed silent, listening. Patricia! Patricia looked. She shook her head. She was imagining things. She blew out some air. I'm here. Susie had followed her sister back to bed, but now she was creeping away. This time, she paused for a second outside. Her mum's room. She paused outside her mum's room. She was probably on the phone with Jeannie. They talked pretty much every day, either in person or over the phone. If Jeannie was in town, she'd come by, but she travelled a lot for her job. Her job was buying art for people. Susie thought it sounded like a very fun job. Susie lurked in the hallway, hoping to hear her mum laugh, but the laugh never came. Instead, the footsteps sounded again. Thud, tap, thud, tap. Susie put her shoulders back and turned towards the top of the stairs, descending slowly, pausing on each step. Susie looked over the top of the waxed oak banister to the paned window in the front of the house. Sheer curtains blurred the outline of the porch rails, and beyond them, Oliver's solid presence. He stood like a tireless guard in the middle of the front yard, but the sheer curtains couldn't block the shape of that Susie saw stalking past the windows on the front porch. The shape was too big to hide, and all the curtains could do was distort and disguise what it was. The shape moved slowly, deliberately, lurching in sync with all the sounds of its steps. Thud, tap, thud, tap. It was as if it had moved its head swiveled. Every few steps, Susie could see a reflection of the sharp eyes that as they searched the interior of the house. Every time those eyes looked her way, Susie turned into stone, willing herself. So she continued down the stairs, managing one step for every 6 footsteps she heard at the front porch. By the time she reached the first floor, the shape was passing the last of the tall windows on the left side of the house. Susie tiptoed ahead of it, ducking into what used to be her dad's office. She watched the shape outside pass the office window and head toward the kitchen side of the house. Hesitating only for a moment in the empty room, lined up with dusty shelves, Susie pushed off the door jamb. And she went to the kitchen for the second time that night. She crouched behind the island as the shape passed through the yellow light outside the kitchen window. Once it had moved on, heading back toward the front of the house, Susie stood. She clenched her fists and released them, and she went to the front door. The front door was old as a house, built of thick wood and stained so many times that the door had wanted to stick whenever she tried to open it. The carved front door reminded Susie that time couldn't be stopped, no matter how much she wanted it to be. The footsteps paused. She listened. She heard nothing at all. She reached for the doorknob and she opened it. She opened it in increments. 2 inches, 6 inches, a foot. She took a deep breath and stepped around the door and looked up. She waited, like she always did, every night. Frightening, familiar, persistent. Susie didn't cringe or tremble or jump back, even though it would have been reasonable for her to do any of those things. Instead, she said, "Is it time to go back already?" Chica held out her yellow hand. Her mouth didn't move. Susie knew Chica wouldn't answer because Chica didn't talk to her. Susie turned away from the man-sized animatronic standing in front of her. She looked back up at the stairs, longing, but the longing didn't do any good. Susie looked back at the animatronic, ignoring the gaping metal mouth with all the teeth. Susie focused on Chica's bright yellow body and the big white bib hanging around Chica's neck, the one that said, "Let's eat." Then she looked at the cupcake Chica held. Susie thought the cupcake was scarier than Chica. It had eyes and 2 buck teeth and 1 candle that stood straight from the middle of it. Susie didn't know what the candle was for. 1 day, 1 year, 1 child. Letting Chica take her hand, Susie walked away from her house. Every step made her feel less like herself. By the time she passed all of her still falling leaves, she was lost. Patricia stared through the open front door at the oak tree that was dropping the leaves on the front lawn. She had a feeling that she'd just missed something important. Several minutes before she'd heard the sound again. This time she couldn't talk herself out of it. She left her bedroom and came into the hallway, and when she looked down the stairs, the front door was standing wide open. Her heart racing, she'd run into Samantha's room and peered in. One glance slowed her heart rate. Okay. Her worst nightmare wasn't bringing out, but why was the door open? Grabbing a pair of knitting needles and holding them in front of her like a knife, she crept through the house, checking for an intruder. There was nothing. Patricia closed the door and turned the deadbolt and pressed her hands against the door, pushing with all her strength as she could as she shoved away the reality, maybe press into some other form. Pulling her hands back abruptly, she sucked in a breath. There was something she hadn't considered. What if someone had come through the still open door while she searched the house? She turned and ran upstairs to Samantha's room. She nearly collapsed in relief. Everything was okay. Samantha was awake. She sat up in bed, the covers pulled up around her neck, fists clenched, her knuckles stark white. Tears in her made her eyes sparkle in the faint light from her bedside, Patricia sat down beside her daughter. She wanted to pull Samantha into a tight hug and never let you go hug, but Samantha wouldn't like that. All she tolerated was the slightest touch. So Patricia briefly placed a hand on Samantha's shoulder before she said, "I know you miss her. I miss her too." Samantha blinked and 2 tears escaped her eyes, meandering down the lean cheeks. She didn't bother to wipe them away. Patricia sat next to Samantha for a long time, but neither mother nor daughter spoke again. Finally, Patricia stood and kissed the top of her daughter's head and returned to her huge bed. Samantha waited for her mother to leave before she moved to lay back on her back, watching the light and the shadow play cat and mouse on her ceiling. If Susie was here, she'd make up some story about the shadows and the lights, about them fighting each other, or dancing, or something. She'd always been making up things. Susie got that from her dad. And even though their mum was an artist, and their dad was the one who went to work in a suit and tie and did stuff for business that neither Samantha nor Susie understood, he was the one who loved stories. In his free times, he always was either reading a book or watching a movie. He could make up a good story too. And when he was home, the girls always had an original story at bedtime. Their mother wouldn't even try to make up story. "I'll read you a story instead," she said. Now she didn't say instead. She just asked what book she was reading tonight. One of the stories that their dad made up about a little boy who had a secret place in a hidden room in his house. From that room, he was able to solve all his problems, no matter what they were. He told hundreds of these stories, making up a new problem for the boy to solve each time. Susie was convinced these stories meant there was a secret room in their house. She was always asking their dad about it. His answer was always the same. He'd pretend to zip his lips shut and throw away an invisible key. Susie said she thought the way to the secret room was in their dad's office, at the back of the house, and Samantha thought it was just a story. She was glad that the office was always locked, so Susie couldn't talk her into getting into trouble, because they were looking for a secret room. Now the office wasn't locked because her dad was gone, but Susie no longer talked about looking for a secret room. Samantha pressed her lips together, disgusted with herself for thinking about Susie and the stupid secret room. Then she thought about the sounds she heard that night. She tried to convince herself she imagined them. That had to be true, because when she looked outside, she never saw anything at all. But lying here alone in the silence, in a strange halfway land of night, she couldn't quite convince herself that she made it up. She was pretty sure something had been outside. But what? But why? In the brisk late morning air, Patricia and Jeannie side by side on the porch, a swing-padded seat with yellow floral cushions. Patricia was aware that to any passers-by, she and Jeannie were part of an idyllic scene, both women wearing wide-brimmed straw hats to shade their faces from the sun that slanted onto the porch. They sipped tea to ward off the fall chill. They probably looked relaxed as could be. They weren't, or at least Patricia wasn't. Patricia studied her friend. Jeannie was almost perfect, opposite in size and colouring, whereas Patricia was tall and thin with dark hair. Jeannie was short and plump with blonde hair. In spite of the differences, the both women used to have one-on-one quality in common. They both smiled and laughed easily. Now Patricia couldn't do that anymore. Patricia took a shaky breath. "I'm wondering if I should take Samantha to a different counsellor." She cringed at the way her voice seemed to scar the air. "Rhonda is nice, and Samantha likes her. But honestly, it's hard to tell." She waited to fly away. "But I talked to Rhonda last week, and she says Samantha's stuck. Samantha's clearly keeping something to herself, but Rhonda's doing well to get her to talk." "Samantha's always done things her own way," Jeannie pointed out. She grinned. "The child has opinion about everything." Patricia attempted to smile, but only got halfway there. Remember when she haggered Susie relentlessly about naming that tree? Jeanie gestured to the ancient oak tree. What's his name? Oliver. Patricia started crying. Jeanie set down her tea and took Patricia's hand. I'm sorry, that was insensitive. Patricia wiped her eyes, and she shook her head. It's been a year. I should. There aren't any shoulds when it comes to losing a child. Isn't that what your counsellor told you? Patricia nodded her head. No rule book. They sipped the tea in silence for several minutes. Patricia watched Oliver drop a dozen leaves. The previous night's persistent breeze had taken hundreds of Oliver's remaining leaves. He didn't have many left to fall. Pretty soon, he needed himself a scarf. Jeanie patted Patricia's knee. You're thinking about Oliver's scarf. It made Patricia literally ache to think about how 4-year-old Susie would run inside after Oliver dropped his last leaf. That first year she named him, and she'd returned and held one of the neck scarves Jeanie had knitted for her. Patricia gazed at Oliver. She felt like she could see the scene from 3 years before unfolding in front of her. The scene was a little fuzzy in places, but otherwise, it was almost real. Her little arms crossed, her brow furrowed. Susie said, He'll get cold because he doesn't have leaves. She was dressed in a bright orange jacket, and when Susie found out the scarf wasn't big enough for Oliver, she was heartbroken. Until Patricia suggested to Susie that she asked her godmother to knit a scarf specifically for Oliver. Now Jeanie knitted a new scarf for Oliver every year. I've already knitted it, Jeanie whispered. Tears fell down Patricia's cheeks. She was surprised. She still had tears left to cry. She was always so anthropomizing and prophesizing. Patricia said, I never saw a problem with it. There wasn't a problem with it. She was an empathetic child with a vivid imagination, which is why she was so easily lured. Patricia didn't recognise her voice, normally soft, now hard and rough as Oliver's bark. I should have discouraged her flights of fancy. I should have... Stop it. Jeanie shifted to face Patricia. Not all the murdered children were like Susie. You don't know that. It would have been different if she'd been a different kind of child. You can't keep trying to find reasons to blame yourself. Patricia looked down. I hated that place, she whispered. It always seemed creepy to me, but Susie loved it. Jeanie frowned. Are you sure you want to go over this again? I need to. No, you don't. Yes, I do. I can't forget it. And why not? How are you helping Susie by torturing yourself with the details over and over? Patricia wanted to yell at Jeanie to shut up, but she didn't have the energy. Jeanie took both Patricia's hands. Your daughter was murdered by a serial killer. She was lured to her death in a place that she should have been safe. There, we dug it up again. Feel better? Patricia yanked her hands back and started to stand, and Jeanie grabbed her arm and held her in place, her grip pinching at Patricia's skin. Don't run away, she shouted, then lowered her voice and kept her firm, just shy of scolding. You can't dredge up the past and then run from it. If you insist on trotting it out to torture yourself regularly, at least you should do it head on. If you don't, you'll be running away your whole life, and you'll never be able to let Susie go. A car zipped by on the road, its engine revving. The smell of the exhaust wafted up the porch. Something about the odour raised Patricia's anger. She was wearing her favourite sweater, the one you knitted for her. The magenta one with pink stripes, Jeanie said. She wanted sequins. And you wouldn't let me put any on the sweater, so you put rhinestones on her jeans instead. Jeanie laughed. You were really angry with me. Patricia wiped her eyes. Stupid thing to be angry about. Junie gently squeezed Patricia's arm and then let go. A breeze curled onto the porch from the front yard and Patricia shivered. Susie watched Samantha lean on the rake, a scowl at Oliver. It's not his fault, Susie said. He can't help it that his leaves land on the ground when he lets them go. Samantha sighed. Susie tried to be annoyed. I said I'd do it, she reminded Samantha, right after they'd gotten home that afternoon with their mum. Maybe you can do a little raking before dinner. Susie had said, I'll do it. But before Susie could rake, Samantha had grabbed it. And now she wouldn't let go. She'd rather do it right. And not like doing it then let someone else do it wrong. Fine, let Samantha rake. She would hang out with Oliver, listening to the and not like doing it then let someone else do it wrong. Fine, let Samantha rake. She would hang out with Oliver, listening to the rasp and the scuff of the rake. Susie went around the back side of the trunk, away from the road, and hugged him. Oliver smelled smoky and moist. Laying the side of her face against the trunk, she listened. Sometimes she listened really hard to be sure she could hear him breathing. Hi, Samantha. The greeting came from the sidewalk, and Susie peered at the lady. She thought they were worms. She'd screamed. Her mum had explained that what the blue jagged lines were. In a tall house on top of a tall old mountain, a tall old ghost floated through the main hall. Susie's mum began reading. Susie plunked the pillow under her head and scooted closer to Samantha. Samantha's breath caught, and she turned Samantha into a log, as if an evil witch had suddenly froze her. Susie sniffed and backed away. Why was Samantha mad at her? The tall old ghost in the tall old house wasn't a pretty ghost, Susie's mum read. But he was a happy ghost. He was a very, very happy ghost. Susie noticed her mum's eyes were shiny and wet. Susie also noticed her mum's voice sounded choked and crackly. Keep going, Samantha said. Their mother sighed again. Susie's mum returned to the familiar story about the ghost who was happy because he got to spend forever with his family. Until he found out he wouldn't spend forever with them, since they were moving. That part always made Susie sad, as it made the ghost in the story sad. She couldn't imagine moving out of this house. Who would take care of Oliver? Susie's mum read quickly until she got to the part where the ghost found out, away from the house, to a special place of sparkly light. The truly happy ghost hung out. The ghost could never be separated from his family, no matter what, no matter where they went. She slowed down over that part, and she cleared her throat a lot. Susie thought it would be very nice to be in a place where you could never be separated from your family. She loved being with her mum and Samantha. Samantha could be a pain, but she was Susie's sister. When the story was done, Susie's mum stood and hesitated. She went to the door. Sleep sweet, she said. Susie wished her mum would kiss and hug them goodnight like she used to. But Samantha decided they were too old for that. She wouldn't let her mum do that anymore. Apparently her mum thought Susie agreed with Samantha, but she didn't. As soon as her mum turned out the light, Samantha crawled onto the side. "Good night, Samantha," Susie said, but her sister didn't respond. Susie shrugged and curled into a ball facing the window. She looked at the skinny, curved piece of the moon that peeked out into the room. The light wasn't bright enough to see, but it was bright enough to make a lot of funny shadows. Two of the shadows looked like they were dancing hippopotamuses, and three of them combined looked like a clown riding a horse. One of them looked like... Susie closed her eyes. She listened to Samantha's breathe, and she wondered if her sister misunderstood the drawings. Samantha hadn't said anything before she stuffed them under the covers. Why did she even put them there? Outside, a doll sounded on the porch already. Susie didn't want to leave yet. She was hoping Samantha would take another look at the drawings. She had just had to figure them out. The thud, followed by a faint squeak and the sound of the porch swing moving. Then the thud turned into a footstep pattern Susie was used to. Thud, tap, thud, tap. Why did that sound make her skin crawl? Why did it feel like she should know what was out there? Why did it feel like she had to know? Susie pushed back the covers and got out of bed as if something was pulling her from its safety. It was like one of those tractor beams that she'd seen in the space movies that her dad liked to watch. She had no control. She wanted to stay in the nice warm bed, but instead she walked out the room and down the stairs. At the bottom of the stairs she listened to the footsteps, and she watched a large shadow pass the dining room window. And once it passed, she trotted to the kitchen and opened the back door, and she waited. Sometimes Samantha would come and slam the back door, and she'd go back to bed. But not tonight. Tonight Susie could only stand there, listening to the footsteps come closer and closer. At the last minute, just before the steps came round the corner, she closed the kitchen door. She tried to go back upstairs, but she couldn't. Instead, her feet took her to the entryway. The house had a really big entryway, a formal entryway, her mum would call it. She told Susie that in the old days, there used to be a round table in the middle of the entryway, and the table would be held with a vase of flowers. The table always held a vase of flowers from the garden, but Susie's mum had put the table away when Susie's first walking had turned into wild running, because Susie kept bumping into the table and knocking the vase off. She broke 7 vases before I gave up, Susie's mum liked to tell people. She never said it like she was mad. It seemed to make her happy for some reason. But now the big entryway held only a maroon and navy blue braided rug, and Susie went to the middle of the rug and waited. When the shadows shifted outside and the shape circling the house approached the front door, Susie stepped forward and opened it. As Susie knew it would be Chica. Chica stood tall and stiff at the front door. The porch light played with Chica's yellow body, making it look like the animatronic was breathing. Susie looked up at Chica's pinkish, purplish eyes. Did Chica's big black eyebrows just moved? Susie looked down quickly. Chica's orange feet were planted on the welcome mat, within 1 foot over the W, and 1 foot over the M. As always, Susie hesitated, but then she did as she knew she must. She held out her hand and let Chica enclose her stiff, cold fingers over her own. Chica turned and walked toward the steps leading down to the leaf-covered lawn. Susie had no choice but to go along. Now the small taps of her own footsteps joined with Chica's, and the leaves crunched under their feet as they left Susie's house behind them. In the hushed stillness, Samantha listened to be sure that her mother was in her room. She had listened hard, because the thick walls blocked the little sounds. Eventually, though, she heard the creak that she recognised on her mother's bed. She waited for a few minutes before turning on the flashlights under her covers and reaching for the drawings. Samantha almost didn't see them. They'd been on her mind the moment they appeared. In that time, she'd let herself admit that she knew the first picture was of her and Susie, but what did it mean? Tenting her sheet and blanket, she aimed a flashlight at the drawing of the little girls. First, Samantha thought of the flying-haired girl. Susie held a mirror, but quickly realised it was a magnifying glass. It looked like the one her dad used to have in his desk drawer in his office. The one that sometimes he let the girls use to look at things up close. Samantha had never forgotten seeing Oliver's woodbuck up close. It was like seeing a whole other world. Susie could name things, all the things she wanted, but Samantha would rather study them. That's why she used the magnifying glass, for close-up study. Susie, though, used it to hunt. After Susie used the glass to look at the caterpillar up close, she decided to use it to find the teeny tiny insects in the lawn. She was sure she was going to find something no one had ever seen before. When Samantha used the glass to look at Oliver's bark, Susie grabbed it and aimed at a different part of the trunk. "Maybe you'll find some elves," she said. Okay, so if Susie was holding the magnifying glass and she was looking for something, but what? A floating baby? Oh. No, not a baby. The floating thing was a doll. Samantha frowned. If Susie was looking for a doll, there was only one doll missing. It had to be Gretchen. So Susie went back. So Susie wanted her back. But what about the chick? What was that? Samantha didn't understand the toothy chick. And what did the other drawing mean? Samantha aimed a flashlight at the second drawing. She just remembered 3 panels of a flying-haired girl walking away from her front door in the first 2. Just the door in the third, and the moons were a little bigger in each panel. What did it mean? What if the different moons were getting bigger in each panel for a different day? Like tonight, tomorrow night, the next night. Samantha thought about her sister, the doll, the moons. She got it. Turning off the flashlight, she thought that Susie was only going to be here for 2 more nights. She was pretty sure that she had to be right, but the chick, what was the chick for? She whispered. Susie, of course, didn't know the answer, because she was gone. Samantha's alarm woke her before the sun came up. Thankfully, she was a light sleeper, so it didn't take much volume to wake her. And she was sure she wouldn't disturb her mum. Her mum had trouble going to sleep, but once she was asleep, she had as much trouble waking up, and Samantha overheard her mum telling Jeanie that she could only sleep with the help of pills, and the pills seemed to make the mornings hard. And Samantha learned not to talk to her mum before school. Once Samantha had forgotten part of her school project, and she and her mum were rushing around because her mum had overslept. They had finally ran out of the house to the car, and her mum had driven only as far as the bottom of the driveway when Samantha realised she'd left something behind in her room. "I have to go back," she said, and her mum hit the brakes so hard Samantha's head shot forward and back, and she figured that her mum would quickly drive back up to the house. Instead, her mum bent over and pounded her head several times on the steering wheel. She whispered something over and over while she did it, and Samantha thought it sounded like, "I can't do this." Now Samantha lay in the dark, holding her alarm clock for several minutes. She didn't like getting up early. Susie had been the one who always wanted to hop out of bed and start playing before the sun was up. Susie was like their dad, who used to be part of the day just before dawn when everything was in a state of possibility. "Smell that air," he'd said to Samantha a few mornings. He was able to talk her into getting up early. "Look at the pink light. It's so pretty," Susie would squeal. Not pretty enough to get up early for, Samantha thought. This morning, though, it wasn't the smell or the colour that got Samantha out of bed. It was what she needed to do. She only had 2 more days to find Gretchen. She didn't know what would happen if she didn't find Gretchen. She didn't understand why the missing doll could mean so much to her dead sister. Susie was a ghost, wasn't she? Why would a ghost want something like a doll? But it didn't matter. Susie wanted it. And after what had happened to her, she deserved to get what she wanted. Samantha threw back the covers. The cold air hit her bare legs, and goosebumps prickled her skin. She ignored her desire to dive back into bed. Instead, she stood, letting the thick, soft material of her blue flannel nightgown block some of the cold air. She stuffed her feet into the leather slippers Jeanie had gotten for her.
Samantha didn't like fuzzy animal slippers, not like Susie did. She grabbed the clothes she had laid out during the night and trotted to the bathroom on tiptoe, thankful for the little space heater that sat on a sturdy footstool by the bathroom door. Samantha turned it on and stood in front of it for a couple of minutes to warm up. Then she did a short version of her morning routine before getting dressed. After she realised what Susie's drawing meant, Samantha had tried to stay awake long enough for her mum's pills to work so she could start looking for Gretchen. But she kept hearing her mum's bed creak, which meant her mum was not deeply asleep. Samantha's eyes had started to close, so she'd set her alarm for the morning. When she finished in the bathroom, Samantha turned off the heater and opened the door. Stepping into the hallway, she stood on the dark green braided runner, and she thought about where Susie might have hidden Gretchen. Samantha glanced at Susie's closed door. She shook her head. The doll wouldn't be in there. When Samantha and Susie had thought about Gretchen, Susie was upset as she could possibly get. She wouldn't have put the doll in her room, where Samantha could easily find it. And even if it was there, that was going to be the last place Samantha looked. She hadn't been in Susie's room since that horrible night when Samantha went down the hall toward the stairs. She was going to look for the doll. She would do it in an organised way. It made sense to start from the bottom of the house and work up. Besides, on the first floor, there was less chance she'd wake her mum. The porch light, pale yellow glow, stretched up the stairs through the lead glass window. The light was malted and eerie. "How can glass be lead?" Susie had asked when her dad told them that the glass in the door was what the door was called. Samantha smiled now as she walked down the stairs. Susie was always asking questions like that. Samantha was never really sure if Susie was being funny or dumb. At the bottom of the stairs, Samantha looked both ways. She could go either into the dining room or into the living room. Besides the kitchen, the only other rooms on the first floor were a small bathroom and her dad's office. She doubted the doll would either be in either of those rooms, because there weren't any hiding places in there. So she started in the dining room. The dining room was at least double the size of any dining room Samantha had seen on TV. She couldn't really compare it to other people's dining rooms, because she hadn't seen any others. She didn't have any friends, and when Susie was alive, Samantha was sometimes invited to parties that Susie went to, but she stopped going after attending a couple. They were stupid and boring, and the kids always were mean to her. Samantha wiped her forehead to brush away her memories. She turned to the wall to switch the light fixture on. The table light would come on low. The light was a big metal wheel with fake candles along its rim. Jeannie said the light fixture was a farmhouse style, which made sense. "Why is it called a fixture?" Susie had asked when they were little. "It doesn't fix anything." Samantha crossed the tall carved hutch that sat behind one side of the long dark dining table. She opened the lower doors. The hutch was full of china and crystal, dishes and glasses their family never used. She peered behind stacks of plates and bowls. No Gretchen. Moving to the long, low cabinet at the back of the room, the sideboard Jeannie had called it, Samantha opened all the compartments and found lots of serving platters and vases, but no Gretchen. She went to the front of the room and opened the lid of the window seat. It was filled with tablecloths and napkins. Just to be sure, she dug under and between the stacks. No doll. She went to the living room next. Outside on the street, she heard the roar of a garbage truck emptying trash cans in front of all the houses. She chewed her lower lip. Would the garbage truck wake her mum? She'd better hurry. The living room was big and filled with puffy, comfy furniture. It was too bad it was hardly used. Samantha looked longingly at the long plaid sofa that faced the stone fireplace at one end of the room. Two solid burgundy love seats joined the sofa to make a U-shape. Filled at the corners with chunky oak end tables and centering around a square green ottoman. This was the place where the family used to have game nights by the fire. At the other end of the living room, was another big sofa, with a couple of reclining chairs that faced a flat-screen TV. Sometimes her mum would let Samantha watch that TV, but most of the time she was supposed to watch her shows on her computer in her room. Around the edges of the room, built-in oak shelves and cabinets were stuffed with books and pictures and frames. Samantha remembered Susie's feelings about those shelves and some of the furniture. "Oak!" Susie had said one day when she was about 6. "Oak, like Oliver?" "Furniture's made from wood," their dad had said. "And wood comes from trees. So they kill trees to make furniture," Susie squealed. The parents had spent most of an hour trying to convince her that trees didn't feel pain when they were cut down, but they never succeeded. Susie was sure that the trees hurt. Samantha stared for a moment, and then she started searching all the cabinets, beginning at the front corner of the room and working clockwise around. When she didn't find anything, she felt behind all the books on the shelves, but she could only reach the bottom 3 rows. She trotted into the kitchen pantry and got a stepladder that was kept there. Defying her orderly plan, she searched the pantry while she was there. She found evidence that someone other than her had been hiding sweets, an old bag of hardened marshmallows, 2 half-eaten packages of chocolate chip cookies, and an unopened box of old-fashioned donuts with a sell-by date that was a year ago, and a metal container of hard butterscotch candies that were all stuck together. But she didn't find Gretchen. Dragging the stepladder into the living room, she climbed up and down. She did that 14 times. To look behind books and pictures, she found nothing but a lot of dust, which made her sad because her mum used to want the house to be spick and span. She remembered how the house used to smell like lemons from that spray her mum would use when she dusted. Now it just smelled like dust. She had exhausted all the living room hiding spots. Samantha looked at the big wooden grandfather clock in the back of the hall. She'd have to get ready for school soon. She'd have to wake her mum. Before dragging the stepladder back to the kitchen, she peeked her head into the office. The only potential hiding place there was her dad's empty desk. She hurried and opened all the drawers, looking in the cubbyhole where she'd once hung out by her dad's knees when she was little. But there was nothing. There was nothing to see in the entire room, just a desk and empty shelves. The only thing Samantha saw as she rushed out the room was a funny little piece of carpet stuck under the front edge of one of the shelves. Risking a search of the kitchen before waking her mum, Samantha opened the cabinet drawer after another, one after another, looking behind pots and pans, dishes, plastic containers, baskets and utensils. Gretchen remained hidden. Samantha felt Susie's presence soon after she got into the minivan after school. How did Susie do it? Samantha was sure Susie hadn't been around that morning, and she knew that Susie was never in school. Samantha ignored her sister's insistent presence, and she stared at the back of her mum's messy hair. Did her mum know Susie was here? Samantha wondered if she should ask. Maybe not. Not while her mum was driving. When her mum pulled into the driveway, Samantha turned to stare at Oliver, almost as if someone was making her do it. Usually she ignored Oliver. Was Susie making her look? How? Oliver had a few leaves left. Maybe she'd come out and count them before dinner. No, she had to keep looking for Gretchen. Beans and franks for dinner? Her mum asked. Something that felt like a wave flowed through Samantha. The wave was dark and kind of oily. It wanted to cling to Samantha the way sadness had clung to her since Susie was gone. She thought the wave was an emotion, but was it hers or Susie's? She loved beans and franks. Was she sad that she couldn't have any? Did they have food where she'd gone when she died? Beans and franks are okay, Samantha said. Can we have pineapple too? In her mind she saw Susie's face screw up in disgust. Did Susie put that image there? Samantha had always liked pineapple with beans. Susie thought it was gross. Her mum gave Samantha a half smile. Sure. Susie followed Samantha as she hurried from one room to the next in search of Gretchen. Samantha had been searching for Gretchen ever since they had gotten home. Susie's drawings had worked. Unfortunately, Samantha wasn't having any luck. This was partly because she'd been looking in dumb places. For instance, Samantha had tried to find Gretchen in a hole in Oliver's trunk, shining her light into the hole and muttering about elves. Samantha had held her breath as she stuck her hand deep down inside the trunk. Susie was laughing the whole time. Samantha had believed her when she talked about elves. Now they were inside, going through all the house. There was a sound of running water and clinking pans, and silverware that made it clear that their mum was still in the kitchen. Obviously, Samantha was trying to search upstairs before their mum finished fixing dinner. She started with their mum's studio. "I would never have hidden Gretchen in here," Susie told Samantha as she opened the studio door. Samantha paid no attention to Susie. This wasn't a surprise. Samantha was always being stubborn. Why couldn't Susie remember where she put the doll? She knew where she put it the first time she'd hid it. It had been in her room, under her bed, which she knew was a very original hiding place. A couple hours later she'd moved it, but to where? Susie stood in the doorway of her mum's studio while Samantha scurried around, digging in piles of fabrics and stacked yellow shelves. In mounds of yarn heaped in the huge wicker baskets under the row of windows, and in canvas bins of wool sitting next to their mother's loom. Susie thought all of this was very brave because one of the standing rules in the house was that the studio was off limits. Samantha even opened the door to the storage room in the far end of the studio. She went in to search. Susie didn't follow. Susie loved to play and be silly. But she wasn't crazy brave. The storage room held their mum's finished work, the stuff she sold to make money. They were never allowed to touch it. Once Susie was 5, their mum had left one of her tapestries on the dining room table because someone was coming to pick it up. Curious Susie went into the dining room and climbed up onto the chair and looked at the tapestry, covered in fluffy, soft tufts and round fabric that delighted her. She had to touch them. Forgetting she had just eaten chocolate chip cookies, Susie put her sticky fingers all over the light peach-coloured tufts. And when she saw the chocolatey smudges, she tried to wipe them off, which spread them even more. This made her cry. She got scared enough to try and run from her mum. She ran to her room. In her hurry, she ended up knocking over a chair and falling, trying to catch herself. She grabbed the tapestry, and she'd hit her head on the table, which made her shriek. When her mother ran into the room, Susie was on the floor with a chocolate-smeared tapestry in one hand and bleeding onto the another part of the tapestry from the gash on her forehead. Her mum had been so angry. It had scared Susie. It scared her so much that she never went anywhere near her mother's work again. Gretchen was not in her mother's studio, but Susie could only wait for Samantha to figure that out on her own. Once she did, Samantha moved to their mother's bedroom. First, she paused in the hallway to listen. More sounds from the kitchen encouraged Samantha to enter. "Gretchen's not in here," Susie said to Samantha as she got a peek under her mum's bed, the dark blue bed skirt draped over Samantha's head like a scarf. Samantha popped off the floor, tilted her head and listened for a second, then went into her mother's closet. Samantha began sweeping aside hanging clothes and opening and closing shoeboxes. "Don't you think she would have found it by now if it was in here?" Susie had said. Samantha didn't answer. Samantha looked up at the shelves above the hanging clothes. "Would you just call up the racks?" Samantha muttered. "Yes, I would," Susie smiled. Samantha turned in a circle, frowning, spotting the bench that had sat at the end of their mum's bed. Samantha dragged it to the closets. Susie felt bad for just standing there watching, but Samantha wasn't wasting her time. Samantha stood on the bench. Even on her tiptoes, she had to strain to see the top shelves of their mother's closets. Finishing with the closet, she moved to their mum's dresser. Susie chewed on her thumb. She was sure Samantha was going to get yelled at for what she was doing. Samantha had to know that too. But she wasn't letting that stop her. Samantha searched through all her mum's underwear, stockings, socks and scarves. "Samantha! What?" Samantha squealed, slamming shut the last dresser drawer. "Dinner in 5. Okay." Samantha ran to her mum's nightstand and searched. Then did the same with her dad's. His was empty. Her mum's was stuffed with books, fabric samples and pills. Gretchen was not hiding among them. "I told you so," Susie said as she followed Samantha. From her mum's room, she knew that she was being a snarky baby. But she couldn't help it. She could almost hear a ticking countdown in her head. "Samantha has been snooping through my things," Patricia told Jeannie on the phone. Discovering her materials had been rifled through, Patricia decided to call her friend instead of yelling at her daughter. "What things?" "From what I can tell, all my things. Samantha knows better than that." "Exactly, so she must have a good reason," Jeannie had said. "What could she possibly have? What reason?" "I don't know, but I know she had one." "Nothing's missing or damaged?" "Not that I can tell." "Then let it go." "But seriously, Patricia, it's time to let it all go." Chica came at midnight as usual. Susie felt the pull from Samantha's bed as usual. She felt compelled to wander around the house and watch Chica's sharp, dark shape circle outside. And as usual, she opened the back door, closed it, and then went to the front. As usual, she would wonder why she had to do that. Why she had to do that? Why could she not? Why did she have to leave her family? Susie opened the front door, and the night breeze blew in. A couple of Oliver's leaves past Chica's feet. Why did she have to leave her family? Susie opened the front door, and the night breeze blew in. A couple of Oliver's leaves past Chica's feet and into the house. The night was brighter than the previous couple of nights, because the moon was fuller. The clouds were gone. Stars were thick in the sky. They reminded Susie of the powdered sugar that her mum used to put on the chocolate cookies that she made at Christmas. In some places, the stars blurred into the expanse's brilliant white light. Susie expected Chica to take her hand as usual. Instead, Chica lifted the hand and pushed Susie aside. Then Chica walked into her house. A nightmare woke Samantha up. Her eyes flew open as she clutched the blankets. It was just a dream, she told herself. She felt her heart start to slow down, then it sped up again. Samantha sat up. It wasn't a dream. "Chica," she whispered. Her dream had just told her about the chick in Susie's drawing. The chick was Chica. Chica had been chasing Samantha in the dream. Samantha had been trying to move a shelf in her dad's office, and Chica had been stalking her. Samantha gasped. Her dad's office. That's where Samantha froze as she heard the sounds. Thud, tap, thud, tap. Samantha started to shake. Those were the sounds. They were the same sounds Samantha had heard many times over the last few months. The sounds that she'd tried to convince herself that she'd imagined. She hadn't imagined them. Those were the sounds, except they weren't exactly the same. They were closer, much closer. Samantha had always thought the sounds she had heard came from outside the house. Now she knew they were inside and coming closer. When Chica started upstairs, Susie tried to follow, but she couldn't. It was like she was glued to the doorway, trapped there by invisible chains. "Chica, stop!" she yelled. Chica didn't stop. She climbed slowly and steadily up the stairs. She was going for Samantha. Susie was sure of it. Susie struggled to free herself from where she was held in place. She tried to move. She tried. Then she started to cry. She did the only thing she could do to help her sister. "Samantha," she shouted, "run." Samantha vaulted out of bed, and she ran to her bedroom door. Could she get to her mum's room before whatever was coming got to the top of the stairs? Opening the door a crack, she looked towards the stairs. No, it was too late. The bright yellow man-sized chick with a horrible sharp teeth was a step from the top, just a few feet from Samantha's door. She slammed the door and she looked around her room. The footsteps got closer. She dove under her bed. When the door started opening, Samantha went rigid. She held her breath. Orange metal feet crossed the wood floor. This couldn't be real, but it was. Trembling, Samantha watched the feet circle her bed. She couldn't hold her breath any longer. She carefully let in a little air. The feet stopped. They turned. They began coming back round the bed, and then they paused. Samantha heard a terrifying whirring sound, and suddenly the bedspread hanging over the bed started to shift, and a yellow face with purplish eyes and deadly teeth peered at Samantha. Samantha writhed away from the face, squirming toward the opposite side of the bed. Once out from under the bed, she looked over her shoulder, wondering if she could get past, flee her room before the chick straightened. No, it was already standing staring. Samantha ran to the window and she tried not to listen to the thud, tap, as she opened the lock and she fumbled with the window. Tremors like butterfly wings fluttered between her shoulder blades. She ignored them. The steps muffled as they crossed the rug. She only had seconds. Crawling through the window, Samantha gripped the interlocking diamonds of the trellis and swung her legs out. The sound of ripping fabric made her look through the window. The chick was right there and held a piece of her pale blue nightgown in its hand. Samantha whimpered and scrambled down the trellis, keeping her gaze on the vine as she clung to the trellis. She went as fast as she could. She was in her stocking feet, so the wood felt sharp against her soles. She didn't care. She didn't look up. She didn't want to know if she was being chased. When her feet encountered the rough, solid surface, she knew she'd reached the porch roof. She didn't look up. Nothing was coming down the trellis after her. Good. But not that good. If she wasn't fast enough, Chica would go back through the house and get her when she reached the porch. Chica. Samantha's mind had finally forced her to see what she hadn't wanted to see. The chick in the house was Chica. In her drawing, Susie had been trying to say that Chica didn't want Susie to have Gretchen. Why? Samantha didn't know, but she knew she was right. Chica was coming after her because she was looking for Gretchen. Samantha gritted her teeth. She leaned over the edge of the porch roof and grabbed onto the porch posts. She could grip it well, and finally enough to drop her legs onto the railing. She had to, for Susie. Samantha was going down to get back inside the house. She was going to find Gretchen, but thanks to her dream, she knew where to look. But could she get there before Chica? Susie didn't know how much time she was caught in the doorway listening to the sounds of Chica's footsteps upstairs. She heard several thumps too, but she never heard Samantha scream. She hoped that was a good sign, but she wasn't sure. She thought she'd be in the doorway forever. Time went on, and on, and on. Then she saw Chica at the top of the stairs. She was coming back down. She didn't have Samantha. If she could have moved, Susie would have fallen to the ground in relief. Instead, all she could do was watch Chica come down the steps, and suddenly, Samantha appeared from outside. Her face was white, her eyes were wide, and her hair was tangled. Samantha rushed past Susie. Samantha's head was down and her gaze was on her feet. She didn't look at Susie. She didn't even want to look up the stairs at Chica. Susie watched Samantha dart into the dining room and disappear toward the kitchen. Where was Samantha going? Samantha didn't know why she didn't think of it before. Maybe it was because, even though she kept thinking about him, she really didn't want to forget her dad. It was bad enough that Susie got taken from them. At least Susie didn't leave on purpose. She didn't want to leave. Susie was taken, and she was murdered. That, Samantha thought, is a pretty good excuse for leaving the family. Her dad, though, didn't have to leave. He left because it was too hard. That is what he said. It's too hard. But that's why we need you, Daddy, she had said to him. He just pressed his lips together, something she'd gotten from him, and said he had to go. That's why Samantha was on her own now. Her dad was gone. Her mother was drugged to sleep. Her sister was dead. If Samantha was going to survive, she'd have to save herself. Even though Samantha didn't look up the stairs, she knew Chica was there. That's why she ran towards the kitchen. She didn't know how smart Chica was, but she figured it was worth trying to fool her. She wanted Chica to follow her into the kitchen and look there. And if she judged it right, it would give her enough time. When she reached the kitchen, Samantha turned the light on, and then she tore back through the entrance of the kitchen and raced back down the connecting hall to her dad's office. In his office, she left the light off. She knew where she was going. She ran to the shelf with the carpet piece, and she grabbed the edge of the shelf at chest height, and she tugged on it. It didn't move. She bent over and tugged on the one below. No movement. The one above stuck. Stretching, she reached for the one above that. Still nothing. It has to be. In her frustration, she kicked to the shelf right next to the little carpet piece. And the shelving unit popped free off the wall, opening it out into the room. She had been right. A hidden room had been here all along. Samantha didn't wait for the shelf door to open all the way. She shouldered through it, opening and groped for the light switch. She found one just inside the opening, flipping it. She could hear Chica's footsteps in the kitchen. Good, it worked. She looked around the room. It was filled with all sorts of bizarre things. Dried leaves, rocks, broken glass, old toys, stacks of papers and books. Samantha didn't know if she was looking at Susie's stash of treasures or her dad's. It didn't matter. It only mattered that Gretchen, her curly hair thick with dust, but her polka dot dress, as bright as it was that day she disappeared, was sitting on top of the leaning book towers. Samantha grabbed the doll and darted back through her dad's office. She reached the doorway. She looked to her right and Chica was coming down the hall. She was only a few feet away. Samantha fled through the living room and out through the front door, panting as she looked out into the yard. It was empty, of course. Samantha knew where Susie was. She knew where Chica was. Only Oliver stood in the yard. Oliver and his pale yellow leaf. Samantha ran to him. She hid behind him. Susie watched Samantha hide behind Oliver, and when she turned and waited for Chica to reach the entryway, what would Chica do? How could Susie keep Chica from Samantha? It turned out she didn't have to. When Chica reached Susie, Chica paused. Chica held out a hand, and Susie's hand raised and reached for Chica's, even though if that was the last thing she wanted to do. She felt the animatronic metal fingers touch her. But I'm not ready, Susie told Chica. Chica looked down. Her teeth gleamed in the moonlight. Susie shied back. Chica's fingers gripped Susie's tightly, and Susie couldn't pull away. When Chica turned, Susie felt herself being dragged from her home. She knew she had to stop resisting. She had to go along. So she stopped struggling, and she began to calmly walk next to Chica. Samantha watched Chica take her sister's hand. She watched her sister and Chica cross the porch and go down the steps and walk toward Oliver. Samantha tensed. What should she do? What could she do? Before she could decided, Chica and Susie disappeared. Not thinking, Samantha screamed, "Wait!" Susie heard her sister scream and Chica didn't pause. Susie did, however much Chica was willing to keep her walking, something equally as strong was willing to go back. Caught in the middle, Susie once again couldn't move. Susie! Samantha wailed her sister's name. I have to go back, Susie said. I have to. She waited, holding her breath as she felt something shift in the air, and Chica let go of her hand. Samantha stepped out from behind, holding her breath as she felt something shift in the air, and Chica let go of her hand. Samantha stepped out from behind Oliver and stood next to him, Gretchen dangling from her right hand. Tears filled her eyes. She was too late. No. What was that? The leaves near Oliver's trunk swirled up from the ground, and then out, away from Oliver. The night was breezy, but the wind wasn't going in circles. It also was blowing toward Oliver, not away from him. Samantha looked up at the sole surviving leaf again. And that's when Susie suddenly appeared in front of Oliver. She looked the same way she had looked the day she had been abducted. She even wore the same clothes. Her magenta and pink striped sweater and jeans that Jeannie had studied with rhinestones. Samantha stared at her sister and then held out Gretchen. Susie opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but she just looked at the pudgy doll and clutched it to her chest. "I've missed you so much," Samantha said. Susie nodded. She reached out, and Samantha didn't even hesitate. She stepped into the offered hug. Susie felt solid. Susie felt as solid as she had when she was alive. Maybe even more so. Samantha was never a hugger, so she usually only half-hugged Susie. When Susie insisted on a hug, now she hugged Susie with all her strength. "I love you," she whispered. She felt a wave of emotion flow over her, like the one she'd felt in the car. But this one wasn't dark and oily. This one was light, and it was warm and fizzy. Samantha was pretty sure that was the wave of love. Susie let go of Samantha and brushed away her tears that ran down her face. Susie smiled and turned to Chica. Samantha watched Chica take her sister's hand. Then she watched Chica lead Susie and Gretchen away. They disappeared just as Oliver dropped his last leaf. "Goodbye," Samantha whispered. Samantha felt the letting go, and she felt the promise of something new. Susie was leaving, yes, but it wasn't an end. Samantha knew it was the beginning. Just like the happy ghost in the story, Susie was going where she could be with her family forever.
I do hope you enjoyed tonight's story, as I did enjoy this one as well. Once again, I am Ultra of Taro Productions. This is Spooktober Storytime, and now there is only one day left until the party. Take care, everyone.